So Audience on Demand is the addressable buying platform that Publicis created back in 2008 to sort of usher in this era of addressable and programmatic media buying. Over the last 5 years or so, we've expanded from where we started with display advertising. Video was the second channel we launched, now live in social and in mobile, and continuing to explore new channels as more connectivity to consumers starts to happen via digital connections. It's really those two-way connections that I think are driving the changes that we've seen in terms of how advertising is done, how it's measured, and what we think it can achieve. And the more you see that happening, the more you'll see this evolution in the way we do our business.
Across those 4 channels, operationally, are they separate teams?
Absolutely.
Okay,
yeah.
And I'm assuming this sort of...
Well, let me revise that a little bit. Each channel, for the sake of identifying, sort of bolstering our own proprietary technology and identifying partner technology that helps us do what we do, that's led by individual channel organizations. The people who are actually hands-on keyboards, as we say, setting up and optimizing and QAing the campaigns, those people all work across channel to make sure that, one of the big aspects of AOD is that it is a cross-channel view of how your media is planned and is performing to help you make, optimization decisions and allocation decisions.
Where does media mix modeling play into this for brands if they're really doing this kind of real-time programmatically cross-channel?
Well, it's interesting. To me, I think media mix modeling, like so many other, methodologies that we've come up with over the past, hundreds of years to assess how well our media is performing, how well our advertising is performing. Media mix modeling was based on the fact that you kind of had to, do a lot of upfront planning, put your media out there, sort of taking a guess. We didn't have a lot of interactive channels and opportunities to check on that signal and see how those responses were happening to help us make decisions in real time. Usually, media mix modeling happens once a year, maybe twice a year, and you make your media allocation decisions based on that. What we're trying to do is say, while that is still important for lots of large-scale advertisers for whom the mix modeling is a big piece of how they do their media, we can start to give you signal much, much earlier.
So is programmatic getting us any closer to attribution?
Absolutely. Well, programmatic, I really do want to drive the sort of, drive a distinction in there. The programmatic is a how. It's how we get at making media buying, as I said, more efficient, saving us time in the process, making it easier for the media planning teams to achieve the marketing objectives they want to with less time spent. And I think, to revise something that Gian said, I think it's getting us closer to accurate pricing for the media that we're buying. If we're buying based on audiences and we're able to verify that we're hitting those audiences in near real time, to let the advertisers and the agencies know that they're hitting who they're trying to hit, then we can start to rely a little bit less on the longer term evaluations and reviews and studies and start to make decisions more quickly. Is it getting us closer to attribution? I think attribution is a different challenge. Attribution, I think the two-way communication and having that signal back is definitely getting us closer to having attribution. But the companies that have chosen to challenge the attribution question, more power to them. I think it's an amazingly complex and difficult thing to try to overcome. However, we keep working at it. The media agencies and the buying companies keep working very closely with the attribution, the data companies, and we'll get closer to it as time goes on.
So I'm assuming that data in general and DMPs are a big part of your toolkit in regards to serving your clients. Tell me about the role that the agency, how's the role of the agency change, right? What's your role change vis-a-vis your client relationship and then how you're managing, because what are media vendors or providers? It's a partnership, right? There's technology integration, there's data integration.
Yes.
What's that look like for you in a day-to-day now?
Another big question. I'll just tell you the whole story. The first thing
you asked about, put your hand on my shoulder while you tell me?
Yeah, the first thing, and let me lay down on the couch. The first question you asked about is kind of how the relationship with the agencies works. And the agencies are still the folks who are generally closest to the clients. They understand, they have typically a longer horizon of understanding what the client's marketing objectives year in, year out tend to look like. They are very close to understanding how the client has used multiple research tools to identify who their different target audiences are. What we try to do is take that information and then use the technology, those technology partnerships that we have, both in terms of data and in terms of actually delivering the ad based on that data, to make sure that that audience is really the only people that you're talking to at any given time. And then again, as we talked about before, having that signal immediately back to say, yes, you hit the right person, yes, they reacted in some way or another to the advertising that you put out there. It could be something as sort of traditional as the click. It could be something more interesting if you have a more immersive aspect to what your advertising looks like. Video being, I think, the primary piece of what we're trying to do and trying to advance there, as well as amplified earned media via social. Almost any ad unit right now, any engagement experience can be amplified socially. And we're seeing more and more of that as advertisers start to think about their ads as content. And the more you do that, the more we will be able to enable that type of very quick response advertising and ad learning for our agency partners and our client partners.
That's interesting. So we sort of started to go there earlier, but I would like to explore more specifically because we're talking about video today. Mm-hmm. Content marketing and brand content, which is longer form than 15 or 30s, right? And how that typically, and how that, I mean, how does that fit into a programmatic ecosystem? Because we're typically not, I've heard from a couple ad networks that they're hearing two things: audience guarantees and longer form formats, right? Mm-hmm. Like, from your perspective of representing brands, where does their long form content fit into this?
It's a really good question.
Is it too big?
No.
Okay.
This one's perfect.
Okay.
What the programmatic approach right now is primarily focused on more standard ad length formats, 15s, 30s, things like that. There's been plenty of information, fairly recently actually, but dating back a while, coming back from the industry that says if you're running video ads in front of content that is on the web that is typically shorter form, you want to make sure that your ad is succinct and gets to the point quickly. It's kind of a pain to make somebody sit through a 30-second or 60-second ad when they're only watching a 2.5-minute clip. So that should be, let that fit the content. But again, because we're in an interactive environment, you can tease someone with a 15-second clip of maybe a longer form piece of content, and with a single click, get them right through to that more immersive content experience, and then with another click, enable them to blast that content out to their burgeoning social networks. So if you think of it in a sort of multi-step process, with the initial ad being that engagement hook, but understanding that there are multiple actions and multiple different types of actions that can be taken from that point on, you really start to change the way your entire media strategy comes together.
Well, it's interesting because it sounds less like media and more like experience design. Because you're talking about pathing now.
Absolutely experiential. It's experiential marketing. That's the way you have to think about this, because that's the opportunity in front of you. And if you don't take advantage of it that way, I think you're missing out on something.
But how do you, I mean, look, because you're, in many regards, like where you sit in Viviki, you're orchestrating, right? Mm-hmm. So how do you bring all the stakeholders to the table? Because that seems like that's mission critical to deliver incremental improvements in ROI and create proof points, rather, right?
Yes.
I mean, you got to bring the creative guys that understand how to path,
Absolutely.
Copywriters, everything, right, to actually get them to engage with the content. You got to bring maybe the TV guys, because maybe part of the long form is actually a longer cut of the 30-second that actually made it to the big screen,
Sure.
right? But then this is as much science as it is art, what you're doing on the buying side. How do they come together today?
It's variable right now. I mean, you have some client teams, and it oftentimes starts with the advertiser, who are willing to commit to the fact that all the things that we know about audience fragmentation and lack of attention, and you name it. The importance and the growth of attention being pulled away from typical communication channels towards social media channels. All of those, for certain advertisers, trigger a realization that if I actually spend the time and the investment to take advantage of all these channels and all these different ways that I can connect the dots on how my customers are interacting with me, then I can actually create some storytelling. Mm-hmm. And it's actually part of the new charter of Viviki, as of late last year, that we start speaking more intently to our creative shops within Publicis to start bringing the promise of addressable and data-driven and dynamic media executions to continue to advance that conversation within our own group, much in the same way that our the agency teams are advancing that conversation with their end clients.
So I want to go back to premium, right?
Cool.
Because I'm assuming that I mean, we're talking about brand content, right? And brand content is only interesting if it is at parity with, it's with premium content, right? It's got to be good.
Yep.
Okay, it's storytelling. So this is, we're very much so buy-side centric in the dialogue we're having today. But content is still king. We can debate what queen or his court or her court is, right? But at the end of the day, content is still king. And the economics of this business and how much we're doubling down and investing in being able to, to buy cheaper toilet paper, because it's what we're talking about, because it's very much so a price-driven conversation, or at least value. How do you encourage a publisher to invest in content in lieu of jumping ship and starting to invest in technology, right? I mean, because I think that's what I'm seeing from my clients who are publishers. Is like, they're talking about as, premier brands and content, they're talking about syndication, building syndication platforms, not building better content, right? In order to tackle the video challenge. Like, what's the currency there for them?
Well, I mean, the currency is tough to describe. I mean, I had a conversation with folks at Microsoft years ago about how to accurately assess the value. I mean, we know that video content as a big giant cluster is with lots of different categories is growing rapidly. We know that the hours consumed growing by double digits every year. What we need to do for the sake of connecting advertising to the content that's out there is help publishers understand that there is an opportunity for them to partner with a broader network of content creators. The ability to self-publish has taken a sort of an industry that was at one time very heavily editorially driven, great many barriers to entry, and almost torn all of those down. And so now a single random video on YouTube can achieve a higher rating, if you're using that phrase, than a primetime TV show in certain cases. It is over time. So what we need to do is, I still think it's very important, as you pointed out, to encourage the publishers to continue to believe that content is what's going to drive interaction, it's going to drive visitation. Content coupled with great addressability is what it drives the best possible ad response, for the advertisers. So I think that need from the advertisers should be communicated, in an ongoing way, and the agencies and partners in an ongoing way back to the publisher side to let them know that their content is their currency, and they can continue to invest in that and expect a very good ROI. At the same time, as going back to what I was mentioning before, we have to come up with a way to sort of wait for the maybe semi-pro or UGC type content, find a way to look for that huge swath of really, in many cases, interesting and consumable media to reach a point at which the viewership says that video is actually worth looking at from an advertising standpoint.
Oh, so that was my next question. Is there a place in the ecosystem for what is now like the bottom feeder UGC content?
I mean, again, I want to get away from the idea of calling it bottom feeder. I know that that's something that's been ascribed to it, and a lot of it definitely qualifies. There's plenty of crap out there.
But you're saying that we have to establish standard qualifiers in order for them to reach a point of being worthy, or
yeah. I mean, I think the first thing that you should look at is simple viewership. All of these videos, again, because it's interactive, all these videos that are being watched are being tracked, and there's that clicker that goes up how many views they get. They reach a certain point, it starts to become interesting for advertisers to take a look at the actual content itself, take a look at the metadata that is appended to that content if the user who uploaded it did it the right way. And then all of a sudden you start to get these different tiers of inventory that may have different levels of attractiveness depending on what kind of advertiser you are. And that's a way to increase what programmatic can enable, which is looking around that huge, that wealth of inventory and that wealth of content that's out there, and start to make it valuable for advertisers in a way that seems very, very closed off and very opaque.
And this is what I think is really interesting from the publisher side of the business right now. And I look at my client portfolio, and the conversations I'm having with my clients who are typically publishers are, is your competitive advantage in content or is it in technology?